people like Canaris, the head of the Abwehr. And in many ways, his loyalty was to the German Navy above his loyalty to the Nazis. But he considered it to be his patriotic duty to go about getting as much information out of the United States as he could. So what spies did he use? In part, he inherited the Lonkowski network and the Gutenberg network. He worked through Griebel. They found a number of people working in the defense industry who were German Americans and would be prepared to cooperate. Some of them cooperated free of charge, and others were rewarded financially quite handsomely by the Pfeiffer network. Yeah, but I should have mentioned that by 1938, Hitler had changed his mind on the racial superiority of the United States and now described it as a Jewish scrap heap.
Hey everyone, Scott here. We're going to take a very short break for a word from our sponsors. This is a very fast turn of events, so the ideological flimsiness really shows itself here. And can you also describe the spy network is successful in learning of different military technology and reporting it back to the Nazis. Could you describe how the spy ring is able to collect it of things like aircraft carrier designs, fighter plane designs, bomb sites, code-breaking computers? How do they gather this intelligence, and how do they transfer it back to Nazi Germany?
The methods varied, but in the case of the IBM code-breaking machine, they simply bought it. They paid some money to the inventor and bought it. In the case of ship designs, these were smuggled out. The blueprints were copied and smuggled out via the ships, such as the Europa. They used methods such as a man called Ritter, who was one of the German spies, had a special rolled umbrella, which was modified in order to take blueprints. Blueprints were rather large objects, and if you made a proper copy, that was quite large as well. And so he used he rolled his umbrella around the blueprints and then took it back on the ship. Ease with which some of the information was obtained is quite alarming. I think that the American defense industry wasn't really geared to high security, and there was a lot of criticism of the way in which they allowed this information to escape. There was also a school of thought. For example, there was an editorial in the New York Times which argued this case that the whole idea of espionage was outdated and absurd, because technical information could now be obtained in the learned journals. People weren't guarding their secrets anymore. The new design of American destroyer, the naval ship, the destroyer, was being built in Brazil on American plans. So what's the point of arguing that these secrets have to be protected? But that was a naive argument by the New York Times. In fact, 10% of the knowledge was always kept secret if possible, but the procedures in American industry were very poor. And what happened as a result of this espionage episode was that American industry became much more security conscious than it had been.
That's very interesting that some would argue that espionage doesn't matter, especially in the 21st century when many people are concerned about corporate espionage or discussions of China stealing intellectual property and things of that nature. What do you think were the biggest items of intellectual property that Nazi spies stole? What was the biggest win, I suppose, for this espionage ring?
Well, you're asking a technical question here. I think the northern bomb sites has gained a great deal of publicity because people didn't realize at the time, in the 1930s, that it had been stolen. But the information got out in 1941 on the eve of American entry into the Second World War. And it was a real sensation then when it was discovered that it had been stolen. But to my mind, the bomb site wasn't perhaps as important as the code-breaking machine. The whole design for the new generation of destroyers that the Nazis got their hands on was actually a bit of a false alarm because they were experimenting with aluminum hulls or aluminum alloy hulls, and the experiment fell through. So I wouldn't rate that very highly. Aircraft retraction systems in the carriers, that is quite important. The newest fighter plane designs, I think that was of considerable importance. And in fact, the people who were designing these fighter plane designs had been trained in Germany and betrayed the details of the designs back to Pfeiffer in Bremen. So I think you'd have to be really a technical expert and a military expert to be able to place these items in order of priority. But perhaps the bomb site has been exaggerated. And in fact, there was a division in German opinion over this. Some Germans claimed that the theft of the bomb site design was hugely important for the Luftwaffe, which copied it. But other German aircraft designers said that's nonsense. We were already designing a bomb site along these lines, and the American prototype had no influence on what we were using in World War II.
Could you tell me more about the bomb site designs? That's not something that I'm aware of. What were those plans for, and what did the Nazis hope they would gain out of stealing those plans?
Well, bombing accuracy has always been a great goal of the military. It enables you to destroy your target more effectively, and also it reduces the possibility of collateral damage, that is, killing a lot of innocent civilians. So it's much sought after. The idea of a gyroscopic bomb site is a gyroscope is what they use with a ship's compass when the ship is rocking to and fro, and they want the compass to be steady and horizontal. And they thought a plane is bobbing about in the air when it's about to drop its bombs. And if they could somehow stable that with a gyroscopic design, then that would improve the accuracy. And there were two companies in Manhattan working on this bomb site. One was the Sperry company, and the other one was the Norden company. And the company won the contract with the US Navy. It was the Navy's planes which were going to use these bomb sites. And that was the design that the German spies got their hands on. That was the one that was smuggled out of the country in an umbrella by a man called Ritter.
And you said that after the spy ring was discovered, many people believed that the leak of this bomb site intelligence had a major impact in the war.
No, it didn't. The leak itself did not have an impact.
But did some people believe that it did?
No, I think that some people thought, and I'm talking about historians now rather than contemporary actors in the 1940s.
Yes.
Some historians have looked at the revelations about the Norden bomb site in 1941 and have looked at that as a major example of the theft of technology from the military-industrial sites in the United States. The reason it didn't have an impact, I think it would have had a political impact. The reason it didn't have a political impact was that war was imminent, and by the time the later spying, there was a spying in 1941, but when that came to light, when the courts passed their sentences, the war had already begun because the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor. So the political impact of the bomb site revelation was limited because war was already beginning. Whereas if you look at the episode in 1938, war is still a distant prospect. And that's why the revelations then had a greater impact on opinion. And I think it's important to bear in mind that America had signed up for neutrality between 1935 and 1937, with 3 neutrality acts passed. The United States was very conscious of having perhaps rushed to conflict in the First World War, and people were looking back at that rather critically and wanted to avoid another war. And that explains, I think, the intellectual background to the New York Times editorial, which said that espionage is ridiculous and secrets shouldn't be kept. It was a kind of utopian view of international relations. And the revelations in 1937 just destroyed that. And people could see that actually the nasty realities of European military rivalries were impacting on the United States.
Absolutely. I want to get into how this ring is uncovered, but before that, in your book, you mention some of the brutal and ruthless methods that members of this ring used to achieve their goals, included murdering the wife and daughter of an American industrialist, which I was very surprised by because that doesn't seem covert at all. So could you describe some of the methods that they used to achieve their goals?
Well, this is an episode that occurred in San Francisco, which was quite an important center for American espionage, as it had been in the previous war. San Francisco had links to Latin American Nazi spy rings and was an important entrepot. Background to the two murders is that a German-American industrialist had developed means of potentially chemical warfare, and the Germans were keen to get their hands on it. So they decided that the method they would employ would be to kidnap his wife and daughter and to inform him of this and then to use him in order to extort the information from him, because although he was German-American, his main loyalty was to the United States. So they took him to the desert in New Mexico, and their bodies ended up there. It's clear that they were murdered by the Abwehr, by the German Secret Service, or by Nazis who had infiltrated the German Secret Service. This is another problem. And that much is clear, but we can only speculate as to how they met their deaths. The most plausible theory is, I think, that the two women just refused to cooperate, and so they killed them.
Was this common, using these types of brutal methods, or was it only when a mission went askew and they weren't able to achieve their means in a covert fashion?
I think that's the example I just gave is an extreme example. Normally, in peacetime, they didn't resort to killing people. Once war began, it was a different matter. But they did. They had in New York City, the Gestapo had a presence, so they were resorting to methods such as beating people up and making threats and that kind of thuggery. It was just quite a brutal approach, really.
One of the protagonists in your book is Leon Turrou, or Turrou. How is it pronounced? I should probably get this right.
I say Turrou because it sounds French, but I think that the family would say Turrou.
As my listeners know, any French word that exits my mouth will almost invariably be mispronounced, so that's good to get now. But
you're okay because he wasn't French. He was Polish.
Excellent.
Polish Jew.
All right. Well, then everyone is going to get it wrong, so that's great. He is a FBI detective. Could you tell me how he initially comes onto this case, and how does he discover a Nazi spy network, and what are steps he takes to unravel it?
Well, Leon Turrou, as I just mentioned, was born in Poland. His original name was Turowski, and he changed his name to Turrou, which he thought sounded a bit more American, when he applied for citizenship in the early 1920s. He was a pretty interesting guy. I mentioned he was Jewish, but he never admitted that. He kept his Jewish identity secret because he was ambitious, and he thought he knew that there was a great deal of anti-Semitism around, and if he pretended that he was a Catholic, which he did for most of his life, then there would be less prejudice against him. And also for a further strategic reason, which was that if you're going to attack Nazi Germany and criticize the anti-Semitic policies which emanated from Nazi Germany, Turrou thought if he proclaimed that he was a Jew, then people would say, well, you're biased. The reason you're rounding up these spies is because you're biased, you're Jewish. The reason is because you're launching an anti-Nazi campaign, which you did in the aftermath of a case. The reason you're doing that is because you're biased. Now, interestingly, in Hollywood, where a number of the major movie bosses were Jewish, they had exactly the same approach. It was softly on the Jewish identity, because they felt that if they pushed it, they'd be accused of being biased in their criticism of Nazi Germany. Finally, the matter came to a head when Turrou had launched a publicity campaign against